Hello and welcome back from the networking break. It's Bruce Sussman, Director of Content here at SecureWorld, and one of your hosts today. Hope you've been enjoying the fantastic content. And our next panel that we're going to hold right now is around a crucial topic. It's about needing a new plan, business continuity, GRC, and privacy, right? A lot of things have shifted under our feet. So where do we need to be looking? What do we need to be doing going forward as we talk about the balance of 2021 and who knows what's around the corner for next year. So thank you very much to our partners who are supporting this effort today, including Access IT Group, Beckage Law, and Simplify. So it's Simplify. It's great to have all three of you here. Really appreciate it. And let's meet our panelists today. So first, Jason Leduc, who is Director of Risk Management Services at Access IT Group, is here. Jordan Fisher, who is the leader of Global Privacy Practice Group at Beckage Law, is here. And Harrison Parker, who's a solution architect with Simplify, is also here. And I'd like to ask each of you to give us a few bullet points about yourself and your organization, your background, because that will help inform us on where you're coming from kind of as we go through some of these topic areas that we have today. And also, if you're in the audience, remember you can ask our panelists questions in the live Q&A text chat box. So Jason, welcome to the panel. And how about you kick us off with a little bit about yourself and your organization and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. Thanks everyone for attending. As a 25+ year veteran of security and compliance, I came up in the ranks in the pen testing world. Later moving into incident response and compliance areas, including PCI, HIPAA, and other areas. Happy to be here with you guys. Access IT is a value-added reseller focused on security and managed security services. So we're happy to share what we see in the industry today and what our clients are facing, specifically due to the pandemic, but how we've helped them over the many decades. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, welcome, and appreciate that context of where you're coming from on all this. That's excellent. All right, Jordan Fisher, you're up next. Hello, Jordan.
Hey, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here with Harrison and Jason to chat through what has been an evolutionary year behind us and what it continues to change and evolve the way that at least I approach privacy, security, and technology. So as you said, I am the global privacy team lead at Beckage. We are a law firm that focuses exclusively on data security, data privacy, and technology. And we really focus on it from a 360 view. And that's what I hope to be sharing throughout today's panel. We have litigation clients. We work on incident response. We help companies to address and mitigate their risk by creating compliance programs, contractual reviews, et cetera. And I feel like from the legal perspective, it is a very evolutionary, dynamic space where it feels like every day a new law is popping up requiring you to do proactive security and privacy measures. So I'm excited to be here with everyone and sort of bring that perspective to the conversation.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, great to have you, Jordan. And next up, Harrison Parker. Welcome, Harrison.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. So, yeah, hey guys, I'm Harrison Parker. I'm really happy to be on this panel. My experience with security is about 3.5 years working with a threat intelligence organization called Anomaly. And then after that, I've spent just about 2 years here at Simplify working as a solutions architect. I've had a lot of exposure, specifically in sales and product. I've worked with a lot of SOCs in various organizations, seen their practices. And yeah, I mean, I'm a full stack developer, graduated from Harvard with a computer science degree. And the company that I'm working for, Simplify, is a security orchestration, automation, and response company. So we're all about organizing security teams virtually onto a sort of workbench. And there you can automate and control your various tools to interact with each other. So great to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate the fact that each of you on the panel bring a different perspective and a different background and kind of a different angle on what we're talking about today. And remember, it's about needing a new plan and all the shifts that we've been seeing. And I thought a good place to start might be a little context from each of you when you think about the sea change that we have experienced over the last year, right? What do you think about from an organizational standpoint, or what are you seeing, right, that organizations are going through? Jason, would you want to kick us off on that question?
Sure, absolutely. So, being in the industry as long as I have, I've seen a lot of organizations mature over the years, taking a stronger stance on security and compliance, as well as privacy, which were all good things. We always knew in the industry that the work from home scenario was going to eventually take stronger hold as, companies were diversifying across the United States and other countries. But I think the pandemic forced a fast track to security, and what the changes that we've seen over the past year or so have really pushed companies to think bigger, broader, to try to stay alive. And in their attempt, or at least what we see in their attempt to stay afloat, what seemed to be, maybe in some cases some rash decisions at first, turned out to be very advantageous for companies, and have proven what some of us in the industry have seen over time as the direction where we were going, which was the diversified workforce.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, that's interesting, that idea that some of these things that were done in haste could turn out to be advantages, and are turning out that way. So that's excellent. Okay, Jordan, what are your high-level thoughts on today's topic?
Yeah, and I love Jason's perspective of, like, at first might have felt negative, but we can actually see some rainbows at the end of this, maybe, that we could take away from it. I think from my perspective, we certainly had more of a focus on technology, sort of a focus on security, but when I look at it, I really think about privacy and the fact that we now have technology that really stands up so many components of our lives. And I think we're so much more aware of it in today's world. When I have to Zoom to go to work, I also get on a video chat to talk with my friends, to talk with my family, to celebrate birthdays. And I think we're realizing as a society the privacy impacts of that, how we rely on technology so deeply to do pretty much everything that we've done. And so I've sort of seen this wave of understanding that, we now see into people's homes. We might see people's family members or spouses, all of these sort of privacy components that I think need to be taken into consideration in how we expect our workforce to engage with us, and how we ensure that we're not overly invasive into their personal lives when we're engaging in these remote environments. So, I'm actually really excited because I think it's forced the conversation that maybe has been growing over the last couple of years, and it sort of escalated that conversation to more of the top of the concerns that it might have had we not had that pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing how right, necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes here we go, we're doing it. That's right, Jordan. Very interesting perspective. Okay, great. Appreciate that. Harrison, what about your high-level thoughts on what we've been through in today's topic?
Yeah, I thought those thoughts were really spot on, guys. Jordan, what you were applying, and you as well, Jason, is where my mind goes, which is the increasing reliance on your tools. You're lacking that human touch, even though we're doing our best to stay connected with Zoom and et cetera. I think everybody can universally agree that it's not the same as being there in person. And this is going to apply to your entire organization, and especially so with your security section of your company. So not having everybody there, working in tandem, you may run into some efficiency issues, communication issues, and it's going to be our duty to try and mitigate those as much as possible. So I hope to cover some of that on today's panel.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, appreciate the high-level discussion on the topic. Let's get to one of our topic areas now. And this is about working from anywhere. You all touched on this in some fashion. It seems like for some organizations, this will be the new norm, at least for some of the big tech companies we know well into this year, or some of them have already pushed into next year before people come back to the office, right? And there's a lot of different flavors of this. But I'm wondering, how this has worked out, and are there new security concerns around it? So, Jason, what are you thinking about lessons learned, or how this is playing out for us organizationally?
So, being as heavily ingrained in security and holding the role as a virtual CISO, I have a tendency to work with many companies at many different levels. Where 2-3 years ago, there was a significant concern about people working out of coffee shops, shoulder surfing when it comes to security and privacy, or just general being in wireless environments. Since the pandemic, however, the conversation of the coffee shop doesn't come up, but the conversation of family dynamics, security in the office space or your new office space. What do we do with situations where family members are actually logging into your work computer or leveraging your work computer or the same network? Is there really any more or any less security concern in those environments than there was at the coffee shop? So when we talk about these things, policy was in many ways in place, but were the security controls, some of the things that Harrison has been alluding to, were the actual controls and tools in place to ensure that our security and privacy were being upheld. So those are many of the conversations that when we sit down with organizations, we no longer take a stance that compliance is what you're trying to achieve, but a security maturity level across the organization is really the goal and the objective now.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Okay. Jordan, what are you seeing around that? Because I know GRC is one of the areas you talk a lot about.
Yeah, and so I love where Jason was coming from. We talk about a culture of security, so really building security and privacy into the solutions that are being developed to address whatever acute needs have come up in the last 12 months. And I think that's really a change of a mentality to really say, okay, are we thinking about privacy? Are we thinking about security? And I think when I think about work from home, one of the things we have definitely seen from some organizations is using monitoring software to sort of help to understand how often people are working, how they're working, how effective they are when working, their productivity, et cetera. And that monitoring software could be very valuable in providing feedback into the workforce, but it can also be pretty invasive because it's very often that we might do a personal thing on a work computer, especially when so many individuals, this is the only computer they have. And now that we live on our computers, they're certainly going to do more than just work in those environments. So I think, when we're thinking about ways to address business needs, building in the security and privacy early on in those conversations, and maybe saying to yourself, what is our goal? And is there a way to get there that's not as invasive on privacy? Is there a way to get there that incorporates more security into it? And a lot of that does, pan back into having the appropriate framework in place, like GRC tools, a compliance program, having that feedback loop, which for many organizations, were in the midst of building or even just considering when the pandemic hit. And so I think it's really put that acute needle on the fact that we need to have the ability to have these conversations. They need to be cross-departmental because they're often impacting more than just one business unit, and they're impacting more than just one risk within the organization. So I think it's really focused on the fact that if you don't have that framework, and when I'm talking about a framework, it could literally be a Google Doc. We're not talking about a very expensive software tool necessarily. I mean, sometimes that's the right approach, but it's, have you even thought through the security and privacy implications of the strategic decisions you're having to make in the last 12 months, and then the strategic decisions you're going to have in the next 12 months as we quote unquote return to whatever normal is going to look like in the next 12 months.
And Jordan, what I hear you saying in there is, even if you haven't thought of it, it's go back and take a look at it now and get that down somewhere so you can adjust what you're doing to kind of match what you've done, right?
100%. You should always be going back and assessing, especially if you had to make some very critical decisions. I mean, some organizations, didn't even have laptops, right? And they were just trying to figure out how to get their employees online, and some organizations, their employees didn't have internet at home. I think we take for advantage, of certain regions of the country where internet is very freely accessible and easy to have in your home. But for some employees, they never did work at home. They didn't need internet at home. They just didn't have it, right? So you might have done some very critical things to very quickly get those employees back up and running. Now is the time to sort of step back and reassess what you've done and say, is this something we want to maintain? Have we thought about security? Have we thought about privacy? Are there better solutions that now, since we have the headspace and the time, we can actually think about it and say, is this sustainable from a security, privacy, technology, resource perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And resources are always an issue within security, right? And so, Harrison, I'm wondering, how do you think companies can maintain, their operational efficiency within security with this fragmented work from home, work from anywhere type of workforce? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, this really is a wake-up call for everybody. You need to have some standard sort of pre-planned ways that you approach different security incidences. And ideally, you have as much sort of automated response built into your security stack as possible. Low-level things should be cleared out as quickly and as smoothly as you can. And the high-level sort of conceptual approaches to dealing with maybe like a major security incident or something like that should be immortalized either like in a list of steps or more ideally, maybe in like a wiki. And then, of course, from my opinion, you should be using some real official software to immortalize your approach and also to have that run automatically. Using a SOAR tool like our company's product, what that allows you to do is have the sort of most senior members of your security operations center write down how they approach different things, and then that immediately becomes available to all the junior level members of the team. So they can have that sort of series of playbooks get run automatically, and they can follow step by step and get instructions on where to go and what to do next. So hopefully this is going to make up for any deficiencies you have by not having the team all working together in one place, being able to speak with each other. And I just really hope that mitigates some of the challenges that these companies are facing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definite challenges for sure. Okay, that's great. Jason, how have malicious users, taken advantage of the situation that we found ourselves in, and in many cases still find ourselves in with this fragmented workforce? What do you think?
So, it's interesting, kind of try to wrap what Jordan and Harris were talking about. A lot of the privacy concerns and automation are actually some of the areas that malicious users have leveraged the most. Not just the pandemic in its own right, but just as an example, one of the things that we come across almost on a daily basis is the separation of security teams and operations. So if you look at what Harrison was talking about, without automation or without those steps in front of the automation to label what a playbook has for things like ransomware, or even just termination of employees, right? Employee decides to move on. So how do you lock out their accounts, or where's the automation in that, et cetera? There's in even some of the most mature environments, there's a huge separation of controls between the security team and the focus of the security team as there are with management versus operations. So when you look at an organization, let's say you implement a security strategy as opposed to an ad hoc process. The security strategy, if you use something like CIS 20, will label and almost map out step by step what you should be doing from point A to point Z. And then you can implement the security controls based on your own organization's need, the policies and procedures that are required, and ultimately build a organization-wide playbook to accomplish things in a much quicker, efficient, if not completely automated process that will also encompass your compliance and privacy controls that Jordan were talking about. we hear these complaints almost on a daily basis. In fact, companies come to us saying, hey, we just built a policy around PII. We have no other policies, but we knew we needed a privacy on PII or a policy on PII. And when we sit down and we look at what they've done, it's not a bad policy, but it doesn't take into consideration all the prerequisites that are actually required to make that policy effective. So building a security strategy, taking into consideration everything that this panel has actually been talking about, is probably the most systematic approach to accomplishing what CEOs, CSOs are ultimately looking for in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, great perspective. Really appreciate that, and that's a good push into the privacy topic. And so, Jordan, I'm curious what you think about what Jason was talking about, and then secondarily, where are we headed for the balance of the year around privacy? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think when Jason was talking, I kept thinking, how do we operationalize privacy, right? So I think we have a lot of really good standards and frameworks to look to from a technical security perspective. NIST, ISO, all of them have some good detailed controls in place that can say, you need to have access controls, you need to have encryption, cryptographic keys, et cetera. All of that's in place. And I'm not saying that that's easy, but I think there's something that, you can build off of there. What we see that's a lot challenging for a lot of teams in the privacy space is sort of twofold. The first is that a lot of privacy is driven by regulation, and those regulations are not specific, right? They're not going to tell you, you need to encrypt your data. They're going to say, you need to use reasonable security measures that are appropriate to the risk of the data that you're collecting. And it's going to put a lot of emphasis on the business to make strategic decisions around what privacy controls they implement, how they implement those, and then how they monitor those privacy controls. And then the second part about it is that privacy is so interdepartmental. So it is not just the IT group that has to focus on privacy. It's not just legal. It's not just the business units. It is every single department is going to be impacted by privacy, because more and more every department is handling data. And so often that data can identify an individual. And the way that these privacy laws are defining personal data is very broad. It's data that could be used directly or indirectly to identify an individual. It's becoming harder and harder to have non-privacy data when you're looking at your infrastructure. So, those are two components to be thinking about. Is privacy is really forcing the entire organization to understand, at least at a base level, the data and the technology that's being used to stand up your system. One other part about that that's so challenging about the privacy space right now is that it's so dynamic. And I joke a lot that I didn't check the news before getting on here, so we might have 4 new privacy regulations, but we seriously may have 4 new privacy regulations as we sit here today. In the U.S. perspective, the California Consumer Privacy Act went into effect January 1st of 2020. Then we had California adopt by a ballot initiative, the California Privacy Rights Act, the CPRA, November of 2020. Just in 2021 alone, we have Virginia adopting a law. We have Oklahoma looking at adopting a law. We had Utah adopt a very Ohio-like law that gave an affirmative defense to companies if they suffer a breach, but they're following ISO or NIST or one of these standards. They're able to rely on that affirmative defense. New York has proposed legislation, Massachusetts. I mean, I could just keep naming the states, Florida, et cetera. So the challenge right now is to not become so overwhelmed by the evolution of privacy law and go back to core privacy principles. So many of these laws are built off of these fundamental concepts of privacy. It's notice, it's consent, it's transparency. Frankly, it's understanding what data you have. So many companies do not even know what data they have. And no matter what law you're geared towards, knowing what data you have is going to be necessary. So, I think it's a challenging space if you get too caught up in the headlines. But when you get down to the fundamentals and you're working with the right partners, you can actually break this down into basics. Yes, GDPR is going to require a lot. Yes, these laws are going to require you to change your operations to some extent, or maybe rethink about them from a privacy perspective. But so many of them have these foundational principles that we can cross-map to. And that's what you should be focusing on now. How do I start to build that framework so I can evolve as the law continues to evolve? And candidly, I don't think we're going to see a stagnant area in this for a while. We're not going to have a federal privacy law tomorrow. So that means that the states are going to keep driving this conversation, which means that each state is going to probably be focusing on this at some level. And it's really going to force you to sort of be building in a program that can evolve with the law as it changes. So that's where I see privacy in 2021. I actually think we all got a break because of the pandemic, because we were seeing this in 2020. And then all the legislators' attention actually shifted from privacy to COVID-19. But then they came right back to it in 2021 when they were able to. So you should actually be thankful that you got a 1-year reprieve from all these privacy laws hitting the books. So that's sort of where I see privacy in 2021.
Love it, love it. Somebody hit the pause button. Finally, we've been waiting for that. That's really good. And actually, yeah, Jordan, it's just interesting to hear how you talk about, developing some sort of framework within your organization or implementing one that can switch with these laws going forward. That's great. And that's a nice lead into kind of a broad topic area as we talk about at today's panel, what's next? And first of all, we know the cloud has been huge, right? And we're here right now because of the cloud. All of us today are meeting on the cloud. It's just incredible. Harrison, I'm wondering, how do you think, the pandemic obviously accelerated the cloud? Is that a permanent acceleration? What are you seeing going forward as far as cloud adoption?
Totally. Well, I'm sure anybody on this panel will agree with me that we have been seeing a rapid increase of cloud adoption over the years, especially in organizations' security branches, but just across the board in the United States. I mean, the demand for cloud really exploded, though, of course, with the pandemic. I mean, all of a sudden now you have to have all these classrooms running on Zoom. You need to have Trello boards to get people working together on the same project. People are starting to question, how do we keep track of what everybody's doing? Do we need to throw this all on a Google Sheet? Cloud demand has gone through the roof. Organizations have, for a long time, been making different plans, different ways they're going to go about cloud adoption, but they really had to scramble when the pandemic set in. As a result, a lot of these organizations just did it out of necessity, and they were sort of like inexperienced, weak fawns, just sort of like hobbling around on their legs, trying to just make this work and get everything going. Once again, I think of educational organizations getting onto Zoom. They had no idea that they had huge vulnerabilities, and as a result, we have some pretty serious, sometimes funny, sometimes inappropriate Zoom bombings. This is an example of a visceral security issue. And I think we're going to see more of that, but it really is driving that cloud adoption much faster than we had anticipated. So yeah, that's sort of my 2-bit there.
Mm-hmm. And Harrison, you point out some of those security challenges. Do you feel like security still is going to need to play catch up within a lot of organizations who've made this transition to the cloud so quickly?
It is, but what's great about security is as it runs into different challenges, it tends to get, or different crises, it tends to get more funding and more manpower. So as it runs into these adversaries, we're going to overcome it. And I think a lot of problems will be presented, but hopefully these organizations will realize that their security teams are extremely valuable, and they need to put more resources into them so that we can keep up. It's almost biological. We always find a way.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, life finds a way, right? I think was the line from one of the Jurassic Park movies. Life will find a way. So it's the same idea. Yeah, I like that. Okay, very good. Jason, what's your feeling right now? Are organizations, they've put so much critical data into the cloud so rapidly over the last year. Are we more secure or less secure, or just a different kind of environment? What do you think?
Well, some of the organizations, and I think it was mentioned earlier on in this panel, some of the organizations didn't even have laptops. So obviously the first 6 months, there was a huge concern about systems that were being brought online with limited or absolutely no security wrapped around them at all. There was no endpoint protection. There was no monitoring. it was they bought it from the local computer shop, and somebody gave them an account to log into in the cloud, and that was the extent. So when a lot of companies got past that, whether they implemented remote patch management and remote monitoring and endpoint security controls, et cetera, getting past that assumption that you are at least on the endpoint somewhat secure, at least at a moderate level. The fact that the data resides in the cloud versus in a data center, I am of the opinion that as long as you're implementing the correct security controls, there's no more advantage or disadvantage other than our workforce can access the stuff wherever they are. So in some ways, many of the companies that we've talked to are not necessarily planning on opening up all their offices. In fact, they're looking to downside the physical space of the office while keeping a stronger remote workforce, assuming that people do their jobs, but coupled with the fact that they've shown a progress in people and their productivity levels have actually increased. So there's some advantages in some ways, and a panel suggested it before. A lot of people like to be face-to-face. They need to be face-to-face. It doesn't mean that doesn't or can't happen on a scheduled basis, but do everyone, I don't know what your areas specifically look like, but I know to get into New York City, it's a 2.5-hour one-way trip for me. That's tough to do on a daily basis. So if I spend 9 to 10 hours a day, I'm still getting a couple more hours with the family than I did before. But that said, as long as there's a security program in place implementing in meeting the compliance controls, the governance controls, the privacy controls, and as Harrison suggested, some level of automation, regardless of where the users are. If the concept behind the security program has matured to that, I think we're in a really good position as companies, as organizations, as the United States, to keep the ball rolling as we've done, as opposed to stepping back and putting people back into brick and mortar buildings. My opinion, of course.
Yeah, no, and your opinion was exactly what we were looking for. So that's excellent. Thank you very much, Jason. Jordan, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you probably have a lot of thoughts based on what the two gentlemen just said. What are you thinking right now?
So it's funny, I have worked remotely for, 5 years. And before I worked remotely, I was an advocate that everyone could work remotely. And I was sort of we should all do that. We could be in our PJs all the time. Little did I know I was going to spend a year in my pajamas. But, I now, having run teams remotely, having now seen the entire society go remotely, I really agree with Jason where I think the hybrid is actually where we're going to end up. And I think that's actually better for all of us. I actually think about 10% of us probably thrive in a true remote environment where we are going to be, go-getters enough to be able to reach out. We're okay with not having spontaneous communications with individuals and being a little bit more scheduled. But there's so much, especially with a new team, especially when you're rolling out a new program, that face-to-face time is really valuable. So I can actually see where we're going to harness the good of technology, which means we're going to allow people to only have to commute once or twice a week, or we're going to be able to decrease travel and sort of the cost of travel, the sort of impact of that. But that's going to allow us then to really maximize when we do come together as a team, when we're in person, et cetera. So I'm sort of excited to see the creativity that we might see where we're going to be part hybrid, part in person. We're going to gain the value of in-person without overburdening all of us to make that long commute to sort of put on real pants, I guess, which now feels like a burden. When a year ago, it didn't feel that way. And so, I think we're going to end up with that hybrid solution, which I hope is going to give a little more flexibility to all of us to create the work environment that we're best suited for. Because that's what I've really seen from a lot of people is say, I'm a morning person. I just want to get up at 4 and I want to start working. Or I'm a late night person. That's when I work the best. And it's going to allow us to really adjust our schedules to fit that. Or at least that's my hope. This is my hopeful positive outcome of this. I don't know where we'll actually end up.
I appreciate the optimism, though. That's fantastic. And wouldn't it be great, right? If we kind of talk about this when building a team, what's your team members' strengths? Where will they thrive the most? I mean, we've talked about that when we were all together in the office. Why not look at that? You know, how does this person best work? How is this team most effective? It's a great idea, Jordan. Okay, Harrison, what are you thinking around this area of what's next or where we end up? Any ideas?
Yeah. You know, I think we're just going to see more of the same. I think we're going to see increased adoption. But what's really going to be interesting is as everybody gets vaccinated and then we, you know, quote unquote, return to normal, how many of us are actually going to go back to the office? How many of us need to be there? How many of us prefer that? You know, it's a real question. And are we going to have to change our practices, or do we just sort of take everything we've learned, all these new tools, we maintain them, we make them available as almost like a separate sort of set of capabilities that we can apply to any new team members. What I really like about it, though, is that it does feel like it's making organizations more global. You know, my alma mater really was one of these sort of cutting edge colleges that pushed extending education and filmed a lot of their courses, put them online, increased the ability to interact with teachers and that sort of thing. So it's really cool to see, you know, like churches taking that on. It's cool to see other organizations get really involved in that and create more support for online capabilities there. So I think, you know, worst case scenario, we just have this increased flexibility for online interaction and working together. And I guess my main concern with that, just to wrap up one last thought here, you know, like our other panelists have said, the efficiency of organizations has increased quite a bit. And I just want to, I hope that organizations now think about how to make sure they draw a line between, hey, when you're working, when you're not, because that can sometimes be blurred if you're always online and if you're always, if your office is your home where you stop working. So I think we're only going to improve in general. Yeah,
well, let's hope we improve that piece for sure, because I know this is the worst I've been at. Well, I'll just do a little more work tonight. Next thing you know, it's 3 hours later, right? And I know I'm not the only one. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And certainly so many CISOs that we work with here at SecureWorld have echoed that same sentiment. So we'll see what happens. Okay, what I'd like to do next is I would like to come around and, you know, we could have gone a lot of different ways with this conversation. Is there either a key takeaway from what we've discussed here today or something we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with the audience right now? It's kind of your closing comment. And you have a little bit of time here. But Jason, let's come to you, then we'll go to Jordan and then Harrison. What are you thinking, Jason? What do you want to leave us with here today?
You know, listen, there's no perfect silver bullet to your organization's growth, nor is there a proven 100% methodology to being secure and compliant. I think there is a level of requirement for both, but in my experience through the years in the hundreds and hundreds of companies that I've worked with, following a known, well-documented, structured approach, taking all of this into consideration as opposed to ad hoc kind of band-aiding things as they pop up, spending the time and effort up front is the best and most successful way that I've seen and proven with companies, even through the Department of Defense, has proven that, you know, following that structured sort of approach, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months down the road, you can actually go back and to a certain extent quantify the efforts that have been put in place and present true representation of the growth of the company for security, compliance, and privacy. Without that approach, everything is just kind of done as needed, ad hoc. And my strong opinion is that you miss a lot of things, even in companies that have been doing this a while. You miss a lot of areas that you never thought of or never took into consideration. And those are the areas where malicious users, things like ransomware, are going to get in. They're going to take data. They're going to stream data for 6 months to a year. before you even know that they're there. And at that point, it's bad news. The amount of money spent to remediate, to contain and mitigate those issues will far outweigh the time and effort you could have put up front.
Yeah, very valid point, and certainly something we've heard from organizations after the fact. So, right, it'd be great if we could just let that sink in all the way up to the leadership, up front. So that's a great point, Jason. Okay, thank you for that. Jordan, you're on deck next. What do you say as a kind of final thought here?
So I definitely do agree with Jason. I would probably even simplify even further, though. I find so many organizations feel like this is Pandora's box that they're about to open, and they almost are so scared to even start down this path. And I would just say start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. I mean, there are ways to do this that are streamlined, efficient, but you've got to get that ball rolling somehow, and it's got to be meaningful involvement at every level. So even if this just is a conversation, you start putting this team together every month to sort of make this a part of the strategic conversation. I just think you have to start somewhere, and you have to start thinking about this because, like you both have said, the worst time to start thinking about this is during an incident, because you will find out that nothing was secure. You will find out that ports were open all over the place. You will find out that data has been leaking or all of these bad things. And then that is frankly the worst time to be trying to shore up your systems. But you do want to just start somewhere, and don't let this fear of it costing you so much money or this, it's going to expose all this liability. Well, guess what? You have that liability whether you know about it or not. It's better that you know about it and start addressing it than just keep, in ignorance, not looking at it. So my biggest thing would be to say, don't get so caught up in the grandiose, we have to build this entire program. Yes, eventually you're going to want to get to that maturity level. But if you're at a 0, our goal is a 1 maturity level. And then maybe next year we're going to go to a 2 maturity level. And then maybe the next year you're ready for 3. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're 2.5, right? And it's sort of slowly building it. Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not going to stand these programs up tomorrow. So it's creating a plan that's going to work with your resources, with your culture, and with your liabilities. And then just every day plugging away at it and moving that program along.
Yeah, that's a great way of painting that picture. And I think it's probably a sense of relief, right, for some folks that we don't have to go to 0 to 60. We just trying to get to, like you say, get to 1 first. Very, very good, Jordan. Okay, thank you. All right, Harrison, you've got the last shot here today on the panel. So what would you like to share with us in closing comments today?
All right. Yeah. Hey, thank you. So I like Jordan's sort of like calm and encouraging tone there. I think what Jason and Jordan said are really spot on. It's all about organization, collecting yourself. The first thing we do with folks who on board with us at Simplify is we take an inventory of all their security alerts and various incidences they want to tackle, things they have to deal with every day constantly that bog them down, that they need to automatically clear out. Oftentimes, different team members have different ways of dealing with those incidences, and it's a great sort of come to Jesus moment where they can say, hey, well, you do that way? Well, that sounds good. Well, why don't I do that as well? And then they write down their steps, and they actually end up documenting that somewhere. So even if folks don't go with our technology, they end up with the benefit of organizing themselves. And that's what we need to do today, and organize those steps. Ideally, if you have playbooks, if you have orchestration, as soon as you write those steps down, you can just turn that playbook on and have that running for you. And that's going to be a little manageable piece of the security problem that's going to be running for you and doing work. So as you slowly start to understand yourself, you can also retrospectively have a lot of work that gets done for you. And slowly but surely, the weight is going to be lifted off your shoulders. So whether you just organize and deal with it, or if you organize and automate, either way, now's the time. And yeah, good luck.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We'll appreciate those comments. Harrison Parker from Simplify, Jordan Fisher from Beckett Law, and Jason LeDuc from Access IT Group. Thank you all for being on the virtual panel stage today.
Thank you.
All right, really appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate you guys. And thank you again to Access IT Group, to Beckett's Law, and to Simplify. And remember to stop by the sponsor pavilion But we got a lot of great resources, Q&A chat you can have there. White papers are available, and also they're giving away a lot of fabulous prizes. So be sure and check those out before the day is done. So thank you so much for being here for this panel at the virtual SecureWorld Mid-Atlantic, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you in person next year. In the meantime, a brief networking break now, and we'll catch you at the next session.